Today on Vintage HLC Show and Tell, we're going to talk about daisy chain and handy Andy casseroles and pie plates. So we'll start with daisy chain. In the summer of 1936, the Homer Laughlin China Company made daisy chain casserole and pie plates. We'll look at the embossing detail to see why this is called daisy chain. See the daisy embossing along the rim. Here's the casserole base. Has a little bit of a sort of a pie crust embossing on the bottom. There's the marking, typical OvenServe marking that was also used on embossed OvenServe. And the pie plate. Again, there's the daisy chain embossing, the pie crust motif, the OvenServe back stamp. So this was not a full line of kitchenware like embossed OvenServe was. This was just additional pieces. So embossed OvenServe, I have a piece here with the embossing hand painted in blue. There's your rose and poppy embossing. And we see the same OvenServe back stamp. One of the advantages of daisy chain over embossed OvenServe involves the use of decals. Because when you have a piece like this, you have this nice clean field on the lid where you can put all these decal treatments. On embossed OvenServe, it's a little more difficult. And even though they did use a lot of decals on embossed OvenServe, they sort of interfere with one another. The decals and the embossing work against each other, unless it's OS 81, of course, but the other ones don't work so well. So we'll look at some of these treatments, and more often than not, the treatment numbers are stamped on the lids. So this one's DC 707. The DC stands for daisy chain. We have a decal sheet from a pound sterling book from 1937. We can see some of these numbers. There weren't that many, as you can tell here. There's 19 up on the sheet. This one, DC 707, has red trim. It was also done in blue. We'll come back over here real quick. We see DC 707, 3 sprigs of M167 with red edge, and 709 has blue edge. So that M167 is telling us this treatment originated on the marigold shape. And we can actually see the same decal on a marigold sugar bowl. So we have a shared treatment here. This one with red beauty is DC 701. With red trim, the base has the same decal treatment. There would also be corresponding pie plates for all of these treatments that I'm showing. DC 701 tells us that it originates on Wells as W5923. This one we looked at a moment ago comes from Georgian Ivory or Craftsman. Its treatment number DC 716. And it says it comes from G12. Platinum band with red encasing lines should also be on the base. This one's handwritten, DC 708. This one doesn't have a treatment number, but it uses decals that were more often used on the marigold shape. There's the corresponding pie plate. Look at that embossing again on the bottom. So if you had a regular embossed OvenServe pie plate, it would have rose and poppy embossing, even though they have the same back stamp. Mexicana. Well, I got this on eBay, and when I got this, I thought, oh, that's OvenServe. They had it listed as OvenServe. They didn't show the bottom at all, and I thought, oh, it's going to have the embossing, but when I turned it over, it had daisy chain. So that was a nice little surprise. And then moss rose that we normally see on Virginia rose. Even though we normally see it on Virginia rose, it originates on Orleans, and we can look this one up, even though we don't have the casserole. There's 019, that's actually moss rose, and it's DC 714. This picture of a daisy chain casserole, I took this at the factory on one of my little trips, and it shows the prototype of the daisy chain casserole with these attached or applied handles on either side. I have to say I'm thankful that they didn't do those because they look like they would have broken very easily. Reed noted in his journal that these were also to be meant for holders or metal frames, sort of like Royal OvenServe, so that may be why these handles were abandoned. So that's enough about daisy chain for the moment. Because next we'll look at Handy Andy. And this one's a little more complicated. We have a Handy Andy base, no embossing, but it does have these rings on it. It comes from the late 1930s. Look at the marking. We see the OvenServe back stamp, but underneath of it it says Handy Andy. And all these bases will say that. These were made with a chrome base, Bakelite handles. So you put the bowl on the base, and then you have a metal lid with the little Bakelite finial that's screwed on. And that's your Handy Andy casserole, complete. And this advertisement comes from 1937, and it shows another one with platinum bands. So those are the two decorations you will normally find on Handy Andy casseroles, platinum bands and this floral decal. I don't believe this decal was used on any other Homer Laughlin product. That was pretty much exclusive to Handy Andy. Now, Handy Andy also used daisy chain casseroles. So before I go into that, I should mention, what is Handy Andy? Handy Andy was a company, Handy Andy Specialty Company, based out of New York. And what they would do is they'd take pottery and glass and metal and frames from different companies, put them together as specialty ware, and then sell them. So they were essentially a middleman. They didn't actually manufacture anything. So when it comes to the ceramic pieces in the late 1930s, they purchased them from Homer Laughlin. So besides the special casserole base that we see here, we'll look at it again, assuming I don't break it. They also ordered daisy chain casseroles. And we can go back to our list where it says daisy chain shape, 3-piece casserole covered, and then the pie plate. We see HAS 86 and HAS 150. Those are Handy Andy treatment numbers for daisy chain. So that's Handy Andy Specialty. HAS 86 is VR 128, so that's Fluffy Rose. HAS 150 is N233, that's Deco Leaf. So they use these special numbers, and by the way, these numbers are so large simply because they're using the OvenServe equivalents. So VR 128 on OvenServe is actually OS 86, and N233 on OvenServe is OS 150. They just substituted the OS for HAS in both instances. So it would be nice if that was the end of the story, but it gets a little complicated. We're going to look at some correspondence between Homer Laughlin and the Handy Andy Specialty Company about a special casserole that they wanted. And they're talking about, in this case, this is Homer Laughlin responding to a letter from Charles Dahm of the Handy Andy Specialty Company out of New York. This is dated July 21st, 1938. And J.D. Thompson says, "We have received your letter of July 19th, enclosing a couple of orders and instructions to make 150 dozen of covered casserole in the Mexicana decoration. But what Handy Andy has requested, or more specifically Charles Dahm has requested, is that they want a special ceramic lid. They don't want this metal lid anymore for the special HAS 25 that's going to be made with a Mexicana decoration. So they say, inasmuch as this cover has never been put in production, meaning the ceramic version, It will be about 30 to 45 days before we can start shipment. We are entering your order for 120 dozen to be made up, decorated, and held up for your shipping instructions. So they were going to make the bases and decorate the bases, and then model a ceramic lid for the Handy Andy base. But the Handy Andy company replies and says, why not use the type of cover with high knob previously shipped to us on HAS 150 deco leaf, HAS 86 fluffy rose casseroles? Then all that remains is to put on the Mexicana decoration. So what they're suggesting is, take the Handy Andy base and put on it a daisy chain lid. And therefore you have a complete ceramic unit. We believe such a cover would meet with the approval of our customers and therefore answer our purpose. At the same time, it would save you the expense of a mold for a new cover. To which the company, or the factory, responds on July 27th, 1938. Thanks for your letter of July 25th. We are certainly glad to note you can use the daisy chain casserole cover. That is a break for us because all we need to do is move the inside rim and we think you will have a nice result. So what he's talking about is taking this lid, which would be formed on a jig, probably a hand jig, not the automatic jigger, where you would have the mold that would form this outside and a rotating tool that would form the inside. So all they'd have to do is modify the tool that forms this lip so that they could get a good fit. Because as it is, it really does not catch well. Well, there's a little confusion back and forth about this. They go ahead and order 120 dozen of the HAS covered casseroles. The price is going to be $4.88 per dozen. HAS is the Mexicana treatment on the daisy chain casserole cover with a Handy Andy base. There's a little bit of confusion going on back and forth that Homer Laughlin starts to think that they're wanting the daisy chain cover and base, and then Andy says, no, we're talking about the Handy Andy base with the daisy chain cover. It gets a little heated, but it's not that important. But in the end, they modify the lid, it fits the base, and everybody's happy. And we see, in August 19th of 1938, the orders start to come in. So we see HAS 25, 2 dozen of them to ship to Michigan, 3 dozen to Washington, D.C., 3 dozen to Buffalo, New York, 3 dozen to Washington, D.C., 3 dozen to Natchez, Mississippi, and so on. We have 3 dozen to York, Pennsylvania. So this special casserole that is a combination of daisy chain and Handy Andy was only done one time, and here it is. And those of you who collect Southwest decals on Homer Laughlin wares, you're going to recognize this as Conchita. It's not Mexicana. They were using the Mexicana name rather loosely in their correspondence, but this is the treatment. And this is HAS 25. Now mine does not have the treatment number. Though if you have one of these, check under your lid, you may see a gold stamp that says HAS 25 under it. The base is the Handy Andy base, but there's no decoration at all. So what they would have done with this, they would have taken this plain base, put it on their holder, and their special daisy chain lid, and now they have a complete unit. So this is not a marriage that was done after the fact, because I think this might have caused some confusion with collectors over the year. Why is there a daisy chain lid on the Handy Andy base? And again, if you can compare these, if you have both, there's the lid that was made for Handy Andy, and here's the lid that was made for daisy chain. You can see this one has a much more severe flange on it to catch the Handy Andy base. So I think that's it for now. There you have it, daisy chain and Handy Andy by the Homer Laughlin China Company in the late 1930s.